Health is a very meaningful part of our life. I'm Walter Smith. I pastor Abundant Life Assembly of God here in Altoona. And it was about over 25 years ago that after I was having a few complications and some problems, I had gone to see my doctor. It was on a Friday afternoon. I remember it very, very well. He examined me. I had put some things off, as most men do. And he had a little concern in his voice, called in another associate of his, and they said that I needed to come to the hospital, Geisinger Medical Hospital in Danville, PA, on Monday morning, prepare myself for surgery because they said there was a mass. It was testicular cancer. It was escalated, and they said that it was very, very serious. So Monday morning I showed up, very nervous. Our church had prayed, only to realize that, it was serious. It devastated my wife and some of our family, but I had a good feeling that I knew that God was going to do that in my life that was vital. I went through surgery. I was involved in radiation later on. They wanted me to go through some chemotherapy, but we didn't go quite that far. But what was intriguing in the midst of all this trial of having cancer and dealing with that big C word, even being told at one point that by the head neurologist at Geisinger that perhaps if it wasn't treated that it could take my life. So I was a young man struggling with family, ministry, our obligations. But I really had a resolve, and there was just a peace that had come into my life that I knew God was in charge. It was during that time and the stay in the hospital that I really believe I understood a little more clearly why I had gone through that particular trial in my life. And many of us do. You're watching this and you join in and enjoy the city on a constant basis, and I hope that through the testimonies that you're lifted up and edified, because all of us go through situations in life and we question. Sometimes we never know the answer why, but other times we do learn. It was during my stay in the hospital that I was in a bed adjacent in the hospital room with an older gentleman that also had gone through a cancer surgery. I had to laugh because it was after about 3 days from my surgery, and before I really even went into the radiation aspect of it, that he looked over at me and he says, we had learned each other's name. He said, "Walter," he says, "I understand you're a minister and you've had a number of the ministers come in and pray for you." And he says, "I'm really impressed by that," and it lifted his faith. So he asked what my dad had done, and if my dad had been a minister, and I just chuckled because I said, "No, my dad was not a minister." My dad was a number of years older than my mom, but my dad had served 10 years in prison of a 25-year sentence before he ever met my mom. But in the conversation with this gentleman in our next bed, he asked, "What did your dad do?" And I told him that that time he had been a construction worker, and I said that he had served in prison for a while. And this gentleman spoke up and sat up in his bed. He says, "Well, I had been the warden of Rockview State Penitentiary near State College." And I chuckled because I said, "Well, that's where my dad spent 10 years of that supposedly 25 years prison sentence. He got out after 10 years, but he spent 10 years of it there." And the gentleman looked at me, he says, "Well, so many men came through his 35-year service as the prison warden." He says, "But what is your dad's name?" I said, "Well, his name was Walter Ellsworth Smith." Just like that, prison warden laughed and he says, "Old Smitty," he says, "your dad was part of the prison softball team. He played second base and shortstop." I said, "Yeah, that was my dad." And then he said he worked in the laundry at the prison. I said, "Yeah, that was my dad." And then tears began to flow in his eyes, and he says, I've been out of church for a long time. He had gone to a Presbyterian church, but he said, I really needed to reconnect. And he says, to hear that one of the inmates that served under him and that he was in charge of, to hear that one of the inmates had gone on to have a son become involved in the ministry just blessed his heart. We communicated a little bit after my hospital stay and a little later, only to find out that he did get plugged back into his church. And sometimes we really don't understand why we go through what we go through in life. We don't understand the trials and the tests. And at first, I did not understand why I had to go through cancer, only to be healed, went through the radiation, was sick as a dog for the first 30, 45 days. Our church at that time was so supportive of us. But then to understand that God had placed us and allowed me to share my testimony with a man who really needed to make a reconnection and a relationship with Jesus Christ. It was worth all of that. Even though there was the uncertainty, the discomfort of going through it, today I'm completely cancer-free and had been ever since I went through that radiation, which also surprised the head neurologist of Geisinger, who is of the Muslim faith. And I was able to be a testimony to him for months following my surgery and my follow-ups. So when we go through things in our life that we don't understand, got to understand that God is ordering our steps. And I just praise him today for all that he's done for me. He's a good God. So whatever you're going through, would you trust him? Don't come to a conclusion before he's brought you through the entire completion of your trial. And through it all, can we praise him for his goodness to us in sickness and in health? God bless you. Have a great day.